Welcome to Coffee and Change. I'm Bill Kirst. As a business professional, a U.S. veteran, a lifelong learner, and an active listener, I help others navigate, understand, and adapt to our ever changing workplace and world. As a third culture kid, I call many places home. Presently, Seattle is where I explore my creativity through the power of words and images. In this podcast, we journey with our guests, gaining knowledge and inspiration from their stories. Hello and welcome back to the Coffee and Change podcast. Glad to be with you. This morning, I'm connecting with an old friend and colleague, Lisa Manning Cassidy. Lisa and I worked together at IBM for many years. When I think about people's superpowers, Lisa has a unique one: asking questions. She's curious by nature, and her favorite projects are ones that she can learn, grow, work, and build a strong team while making an impact. She loves design thinking, and her favorite quote is, "You get to write your own story." Post-its and Sharpies surround her desk wherever she is, and she does her best work when she has room for creativity, writing, and most importantly, fun. Lisa's motivated by relationships and working on self-compassion. She's passionate about corporate social responsibility and helping others succeed. I'm excited to reconnect with Lisa and hear her story as she writes it in Change. Thanks for listening. So, good morning, Lisa. Welcome to the
morning.
Coffee and Change podcast. It is so good to, one, connect with you again, and two, have you on the podcast finally. It's been a long time in the making.
Honored to be here, and I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time.
Thank you. I know you've been an avid and loyal listener too for a long time. So let's start off by anchoring people who are listening in how you and I know each other. I was trying to look back on how long it was ago that we met. And I think it was the beginning of your IBM career. Is that right?
2010.
Yeah. Okay. So 15 years ago.
hmm
And you recently just became an IBM alum. Is that right?
I did.
Yeah. So welcome to the club.
Yes.
How
It's
does it feel?
it's great. It has been a wonderful journey to get here, and thanks for all your support in this transition.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I know we'll go down a little bit of memory lane here in this
hmm
discussion because I think I certainly have wonderful memories of IBM, and you were there probably twice as long as I was. And we overlapped and not only on work, but in network and people and passions. So first of all, let me start off by acknowledging you're joining us from Portland, Maine. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So you and I are literally like in upper opposite corners of the
A
country.
lot of people confuse Portland, Maine with Portland, Oregon because I join calls and it'll say Portland, and sometimes they'll say, wow, it's early for you. So, yes,
Yep.
Portland, Maine.
And when we connected, gosh, I want to say a year or more ago, we were chatting on a call because we've done some work together recently. And there was a song I think I told you about. Did
Yes.
you know the song Portland, Maine by Donovan
No, I had
Woods?
never heard it before you sent it to me, and now it pops up on my Spotify every once in a while, and I love it. It's
It's a
such a
great
unique
song.
place here.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about Portland, Maine, because a lot of people probably don't know about it. Are you originally from there? You sort of returned there after kind of being in DC for a long time, right?
I'm originally from Maryland, so spent
Okay.
most of my youth in the DC area, and I met my husband, who's a Mainer, at a wedding, and so we dated long distance for about a year and a half, and luckily, we were both living close to airports. He was in Bangor, Maine. I was in by the DC airport. And we made a very thoughtful and intentional choice to move up to Maine to raise our family. And when we were considering the two locations, do we want to be in the DC area or do we want to be in Maine? The quality of life, the amount of outdoor activity. We live right now in a house with the school at the end of our street. and have met an amazing group of people and been outside throughout all the seasons. Number one question people say are, "How are those winters?" So I married a Mainer, and he came with all the gear, and my two young boys, 5 and 3, are outside in all conditions, and it's been a wonderful choice for us.
I love that. I have some very dear friends in Vermont, and they have a very similar. They're actually grandparents now, but they have a very similar testimony to sort of living in that part of the world. And I love the fact that you said, your boys 5 and 3 are like outside in all the elements all the time. There is a part of me that remembers living around the world and living in different seasons and different climates, and I guess I'm of that generation where it was like you're just outside all the
Mhm,
time as a
mhm,
kid, like just playing.
mhm.
Boredom is a wonderful thing, and it's the seeds of imagination. How's it been for your boys?
For my boys, amazing. For me as a mom who's just getting out of the winter gear, the hats, the gloves, the snowsuits, it can be tiring. But anytime that we make that effort to get them outside, it is so worth it. I started listening to a podcast called A Thousand Hours Outside, and it gives
Wow.
you so many ideas of what you can do in the snow. And it's like a giant playground with sand, except for snow for kids. So they're building forts. We're taking them cross country skiing. Their school's very equipped for handling all the elements as well. So I've embraced it. And I'm really excited to now be in the month of May. We're looking forward to summer. There's lots of beautiful beaches here too. So it's a wonderful place to raise a family.
And it's also one of the, I believe, 11 states I have yet to check off
Oh,
to
oh,
visit before I turn 50. So it's on my plan. I have 3 years to check off 11 states because I have this sort of 50 before 50.
yes.
There's a song I've written about it that will someday maybe hear the light of day, but I need to check that box before the song is released. So
I can't
I
wait to
can't
show
wait
you
to visit.
around. Come. We're about 15 minutes from the airport, and there's so many cool trails and coffee shops.
Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely. Yeah. So thanks for kind of grounding us and orienting us in the geography of where you are, because I think it's really important that people picture
Mhm,
and sort of close their eyes and imagine where people are joining us from as they tell their story.
mhm,
Um, so let's start a little bit about, maybe let's start where you're at now and let's
mhm.
work backwards. And I have like a whole series of word prompts that when I was like remembering the things that we've done and where we've been and the work we've done.
Yeah.
And I have those kind of word prompts to take us down that path. But let's start where you're at now. Obviously, you went through a big transition, right?
Mhm,
You were at IBM for 15 years.
mhm.
You had a whole career, and you recently decided to leave on your own accord, right? There
Mhm,
was no event that caused it.
mm,
You gave a lot of thought to it. You and I had some very long, fruitful conversations around this change and what that entails. And
mhm,
you and I have led a lot of people through change, but one of the things that's always challenging is when we have to do it ourselves. So would you share a little bit about what this unpacking has been like for you at this stage as a mom and,
mhm,
after so many years at a large,
mhm.
blue chip company, how has the change been?
Yes. Overall, it has been really positive for me, and it took a long time to get to that decision to hand in my resignation after such a long amount of time, and I didn't do it on my own. I hired a lot of people to help me through it. I hired a career coach. I worked with a therapist. I was doing a lot of journaling, a lot of listening to podcasts like yours, and I just had this inner knowing that it was time for a change. And my therapist talked a lot about listening to your body and just listening to the cues that it gives you. And you're right, there wasn't one event. It was getting to that almost 15 years at IBM and thinking, okay, do I want to spend another 15 years or do I want to try something different? And it was a very clear voice that said, let's try something different. This is going to be scary and uncertain. And I am someone who likes a plan. And so this was very uncomfortable for me. And throughout it all, I have a very supportive partner. And David and I had a lot of long conversations about the financial piece, how it's gonna change the dynamic in our marriage, the parenting piece, and I read a lot of books to help me get to this decision as well, and probably the 2 most influential were a book called Leap by Jessica, last name starts with a G, Gallica, Jessica Gallica, and then the second was Power Pause. It is a book about taking a very thoughtful and intentional pause, especially when you're raising young children, and giving yourself the strength to come back stronger than ever. And once I read those books and had those conversations with David, I got the courage to do it, and it was still not easy, and I'm so grateful to have had this time.
Yeah, I appreciate you sort of guiding people through that, and also, excuse me, also mentioning you didn't do it alone.
Mhm,
I mean, you had coaches and therapists and people that walked alongside. You also had authors, right?
mhm,
People
mhm,
that you've never met
uh-huh,
yet, I would say yet, but they were there with you. And I think it's really important that people, anytime you make a change, that you don't necessarily feel you have to forge it alone.
mhm,
And so whether it's music or podcast
mhm,
or books or therapy sessions or reconnecting with old friends, all of those things I think are the stitching of the fabric that you need in
mhm,
order to, kind of understand where you're going.
mhm,
I also think it's interesting you mentioned, I mean, I'll put the word out there and you can tell me if it's appropriate or not. It's a bit of a grieving
mhm.
process. Is that right?
Definitely. It was about a 3-month process of figuring out my new identity. And
Mm.
again, through working with my therapist, she said, okay, get out a piece of paper and let's write down all the other identities that you have. And at first, the top ones were okay, I'm a mother, first and foremost. I'm a wife, a daughter, a friend. And then I got to that second layer of, oh, yeah, I'm a landlord. I own this property in Virginia. Oh, yeah, I'm an athlete. I'm doing this 5K race. Yeah, I'm a volunteer. And that's such a cool piece that I can lean into as well. And so I was able to remember all the other pieces of myself and have the time and space and energy. A lot of that first 3 months was resting. It took a lot to, 1, get the courage to make that decision, but then also realize how much I was carrying throughout being a full-time working mother of 2 young children.
Yeah. The word that you used, remembering, is one that every once in a while it just sort of creeps up in my consciousness because I have to remind people that remembering is literally like recentering back in your body, right? Our bodies is basically appendages and members of
Mhm,
who we are. And remembering is exactly that. It's
mhm,
and I loved how you said, you recounted, you're like, "Oh, yeah, I am a volunteer. Oh, yeah, I am a landlord. Oh, yeah." It's almost like this discovery,
mhm,
this treasure map of like, "Oh, wow, wow. Yeah, that has been there the whole time." But it's hard work. Like, it's really hard work because I know when I left IBM, at the time, the analogy I was using, it was a very scary time. The analogy I was using was from the movie Independence Day. Do you remember that movie?
mhm,
So I kept saying to people when they asked me, "What is it like to leave a company like IBM?" And I said, "You remember the movie Independence Day?" And they said, "Yeah." And I said, "Do you remember when like the really big ships came in and it like you looked up and all you could see in the sky was like the ship, the mothership. You couldn't see sky."
yeah,
I said, "That's what it felt like." I loved my time at IBM. I had an amazing time, but you everywhere you looked was the mothership.
mhm,
Um, and you forgot what sky looked like. And I said, "I need to go remember what sky looks like." And it was scary. And things didn't necessarily work out the way I expected, but I saw a lot of sky. There were lots
mhm,
of tears, there was lots of loss, but I saw a lot of sky. And
mhm,
it's how I discovered myself.
mhm.
And I imagine it was probably pretty similar for you. I mean, you had double the time I had there, right? You had 15 years, I had about 6 or 7, I think. Um, was it that sensation for you to be like, "Okay, what does it look like when I look up and I don't see the mothership?"
It brings up a lot of emotions,
Yeah.
and for people like you and me that give so much to what we do and the relationships that we develop there, it took a lot of journaling, a lot of going on long walks, a lot of conversations with trusted friends and family to process all of that and to share again and again, "Oh, why did you leave and what are you doing?" And to not have that plan in front of me. Also have question marks for people, but I had to keep anchoring myself in that inner knowing of this is what my body needs right now. I need to take this time for myself. And I would drop my kids off. I put in my notice in December and I would remember I dropped them off and I would come home and I would sleep for hours because I was just exhausted and I didn't realize how tired I was.
The release, right? I think
Mhm.
that's the one thing that people don't quite understand, until you step out of it or
Mhm.
step beside it. Your body is literally like triaging,
Mhm.
and it's processing, and it doesn't, it's not a shameful thing, right? The fact that we
Mhm.
were so good at what we did, right? You were exceptional at what you did, um, and it was exhausting.
Mhm.
And we need, like, our bodies were actually not meant or built
Mhm.
to do that sustained type of intellectual, physical, emotional work all the time, every day, day in and day
Mhm.
out, right?
And the Surgeon General issued in the fall of 2024, right around the time when I was making this decision, a very broad claim saying US parents are not okay. And when I read that, I felt so seen and heard. I thought, "Yes, this is being finally recognized that this is a lot to carry."
Yeah. One of our dear, dear friends, Caitlin Halferty, who we
Yeah.
worked with for many years, I got a chance to visit her in Sweden last year, right? My husband and I went to visit her, her husband, her kids in Sweden. And it was a really interesting experience for me because, as US centric, right? We've all worked for sort of large corporations, but she had the opportunity to go be a US employee for
Mhm.
a Swedish company in
Mhm.
Sweden.
Mhm.
And it was really fascinating discussion I had with her because I asked her, I said, how is the culture change? How is the difference? And she said, it's really interesting. A lot of people here, um, they live a healthier lifestyle.
Mhm.
The parents actually prioritize their children and their family and being outside. Um, and interestingly, the same amount of good work gets done.
Mhm.
But that burden and that heaviness of I should, I could, I
Mhm.
would, it's not pervasive, I think, in the
Mhm.
narrative. And having lived in Europe myself, I know that.
Mhm.
And I do think it is really interesting that the Surgeon General sort of issued that statement, not only around health, but loneliness and stress and shame. And it's taking its toll on our body. I think we learned a lot during the pandemic,
Mhm.
but in many ways, I feel like we've forgotten more than we learned. How do you sense that?
The pandemic was such a strange time that I feel as if I've almost compartmentalized it and blocked it.
Yeah,
I had a newborn and I was just going back after my first maternity leave in the pandemic, and it was so stressful to be in that time with a young child, and I was figuring it all out for the first time as a mom with this other layer of health scare, and what I did during that time is moved back to my parents with
yeah,
my husband and our dog and our little baby, and that time was so grounding in family, and that was our unit, and we were, again, outside all the time and able my mother was able to watch Reed while we were working, and they have such a great bond now because they spent that, gosh, maybe 6 months we were down there, and so there was a lot of joy during that time, ironically, because I was with my parents in a time that I didn't think I would get to be with them while I was raising my son, but then overall, that layer of uncertainty was so scary.
yeah. And I think that level of, right, sort of that volatility, that uncertainty. We talk about the acronym VUCA a lot in the military, and I think it's used in corporate worlds now too. But I think it's in times like that that we actually are tested and understand who we are. But I also think we have to sort of touch wood, right? Like go
Mm,
outside, put your feet on the
mhm,
ground, um, laugh,
mm,
right?
mhm,
Remember the core components of who we are.
mhm,
And I know that for you, that's been like nature's been a wonderful
mhm,
companion to you. Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, you and I live in both some amazing parts of the world. We're so fortunate to have as much greenery and the seasons and the water and the mountains. And talk a little bit about how nature's been a companion, but also a bit of an instructor for you.
mhm. I remember one conversation that we had, Bill, and it was the IBM Change Exchange where you very graciously came and was interviewed, and you talked about the power of taking a walk by a body of water. And that has always stuck with me. And so when I have been going on my walks, and it might just be a little stream in the woods, or it could be on a beach here, I've been sending you pictures because you always pop into my mind. And there is something very calming about the waves and the repetitiveness and that book Blue Mind behind
Yeah.
me that we were talking about before we started recording is all about the science of being on, near, in water. And again, when I was raising my boys, one of the lessons in parenthood is if your child is crying and you don't know why, take them outside or put them in water, and those are things that are true for ourselves as well, and I remember thinking about that raising my boys, and then, "Why don't I do this for myself? Why don't I go outside, or why don't I take a shower?" And so, parenting for me has been a lot of relearning as well, and that nature piece is throughout the time with my children and also in this power pause that I'm in.
Yeah. I love that I saw that book on your bookshelf behind
Yep.
you, Blue Mind. I had such an interesting way to find that book. I actually this is pre-pandemic, and in Seattle, it was very trendy at the time. I didn't realize I was ahead of the trend, but these sensory deprivation saltwater float tanks were popping up everywhere. And, I ended up becoming my last consulting job, where I was working, they ended up calling me the chief float officer because I ended up being such an evangelist of this modality and this therapy, and at one point, you'll love this story, I I used to go probably twice a week to the float place and, probably middle of the week and then on the weekend, usually on a Saturday morning, very early, to sort of just cleanse and clean my brain almost before I went into the weekend so I could actually have a weekend as opposed to the hangover thoughts we pull in from our work. And I said to the float place, I said, "Hey, can I have a corporate event here?" And they said, "What do you have in mind?" And I said, "Well, I have all these people I keep talking to us about, and they want to try it. So, like, can we pick an evening where you sort of close, but only open to us?" They had about 10 rooms, and I said, "I'll have people sign up and they can try it out." And they said, "Sure, we'd love that." Right? It's sort of like free marketing. And so, so I had more than a handful, ten or so folks join. And I'd say about half of them came out of it terrified, absolutely unhinged, terrified. Like, I would never do that again. Why do you put yourself through that? And the other half were like, "Where's this been all my life?"
Uh-huh.
Um, and I remember shortly after that, I was sitting again in the little waiting area, waiting for folks to get out, and I saw the book Blue Mind
Oh,
sitting
okay.
there, and I was like, "Oh, okay." And I asked the gentleman, "Hey, can I take this book?" And he's like, "Yeah." And so I ended up ordering it on Audible myself, and then a Kindle version and a physical version, but
Mhm.
it made so much sense. I was like, "Well, the neuroscience is just clear here." Um, so I am curious, like, why do you think it is that some people, the concept of stillness, the concept
Mm.
of deprivation, the concept of, like, nothing coming at us, you can't take your cell phone in with you, like, no light, like, you're floating in the salt water that kinda makes you feel like you're floating in space. Why do you think that would be terrifying for some and delightful for others?
Okay, we're really getting into it here, Bill. Let's see. Putting on my psychology hat. Well, the human mind has 90,000 thoughts a day, and if you're walking around with that many thoughts in your mind, most of them are thoughts you've had before and often towards the negative side. That's the neuroscience of making it very difficult to be in your own brain. And when you start reading about the human brain and the ways that you can purposefully redirect those thoughts, if you don't have that skill, it can be a really scary place. And personally, I'm wondering how much space you have in that flotation tank. Is it is it really confined?
These rooms were actually quite spacious, to be fair. So,
Okay.
I actually can't do the capsule pods where it's very confined and it sort of feels like a coffin. That's very unsettling for me. The
I would think
rooms
for most people.
yeah. I mean, some people actually like that, right?
No.
They kind of almost like the womb, like.
Okay.
Um, the rooms that we were using were actually kind of full rooms. So you had a very high ceiling, you had your own
Okay.
sort of tub, you had your own sort of shower area and all that. And so each room was succinct and distinct, and there was no like closing of a capsule that came down on you, right? That would have
Mhm.
been too much to ask people to try for the first time. But even that, right? The concept of being in a dark room, in water that essentially was the same temperature as your human body, right? So that's where
Mhm.
it starts to play a little bit of tricks on you,
Mhm.
and you start to forget that you're actually in water, and your sort of sensory,
Mm.
dimensionality, if you will, goes away. Um, and you're right. What to me, the first time I did it, it was probably about, and I the first time I floated for an hour. Um,
Wow.
I ended up building up to the point where I could float for 2 hours, but no more. Like, they don't recommend more than that. They're like, "That's just not," you're in a lot of, these Epsom salts and everything else, and so it really dries you out. But the first 20 minutes, 25 minutes of anybody kinda going into a sensory deprivation, exactly what you described happens. The neurons of our brain fire on 90,000 thoughts, and most of them negative. So I
Mhm.
remember the first time I floated, and this is kind of a funny story, but, like, the th the things that went through my mind were, "Well, how would I know if somebody hasn't come into the store or
Right.
whatever location, killed the person at the front desk, and
Yeah,
is"
that's your military
right,
background. You always have to have situational awareness.
right. How do I know they're not literally coming room to room and they're gonna, have some terrible violent event? Like, I wouldn't know that because I'm in this, noiseless, sensationless, dark, whatever. And all of those thoughts go through your mind. I was like, what happens if the power goes out? What happens if there's a power surge? Will I be electrocuted? Like, every thought came through my head like a million miles an hour. And then after about 25 minutes, when all those thoughts that you possibly could have of everything bad happening end, you're like, well, now what? And
Mm.
then you're like, imagination sort of kicks in and you start into this dream state. And it's amazing when you make it past that threshold of perpetual negativity, you realize there's all of this like imagination and access
Mhm.
and part of our brain that we typically don't allow to create.
Mm.
And that's for me when these dream states started. And I had some really unique experiences where I would experience dreaming backwards. So
Mm.
I would have entire scenes play out as if they were on rewind, kind of the early days where we used to watch on VCRs and you hit the rewind button, right? And you have the line that would go through the TV screen and you'd see it all backwards. It was like that for me. And I didn't know what all that meant. And then I would get out of the float sessions. I would sort of, dry off to the best of my ability, reach for my phone on the other side of the room, hit the audio record button on my phone, and I would just speak to
Oh,
whatever I just saw. And what's interesting is most of those audio notes, Lisa, I don't even recognize my own voice.
wow.
Like, I'm like, that doesn't even sound like me. And then those have become kind of seedlings of stories and parts of books and writings and downloads, and all because there is some truth to in water we have access to this part of ourselves that's truer
Mhm.
than true.
Mhm. So interesting. Now, with the temperature piece,
Yeah.
have you ever done cold plunges? Because
Yes.
okay, I'm curious to hear about your experience with that, and if you like it, there's a place in Maine I will take you.
Yeah, so my experience with cold plunges probably starts back when I was in high school. As you recall, I lived in Russia for 4 years, and at the time, I had the opportunity to do kind of the ritual that is go into the sauna or the banya, as they call it, and then you would go out of the sauna and you would literally jump into a hole in the ice, and jump into the water underneath the ice. And so I had those sensations, those stark sensations from hot to cold as part of that ritual, and it's very healing. I'm not necessarily one of the people who, jumped on, again, the trend or the bandwagon of, like, "Let me put a plunge tank in my garage and, cold plunge every morning." I'm not that guy, and for each person that works for, great. But I do really enjoy the sensation of occasionally going and just having a reset, truly
Mhm,
a body reset of the cold plunge. I find it very refreshing. Occasionally, I'll go, friends invite me to one of those spas that have sort of the hot tub and the cold plunge. I find myself very meditative in the cold
mhm,
plunge pool. I will almost get to the point where you get past the shaking
mhm.
and you just center, and I can be in there in a meditative state, and people are just looking at me like, "Who's the crazy guy that's, like, still in the cold plunge?" Um, but I think it's because you access different parts of your creative mind when you go
Mhm,
really, really still. And if you could make it past the chills and
mhm.
the neuro belief, the perception that I am freezing, you can actually persist and endure and calm yourself in a beautiful way.
Mhm. Well, the water here in Maine is always cold, so it's the constant cold plunge when I'm in with my kids in
I
the
bet.
summer.
I bet. It reminds me a little bit of, I also loved the west coast of Ireland, and one of the words we're gonna talk about is Dublin. That was on
Mhm,
our word prompt list, but, I had the opportunity when I was a teenager to spend time in Ireland, and we were on the west coast, and we would go swimming in the North Atlantic, right? It was cold. It was like Maine. And so I do love that sensation, right? It's a pristine and powerful kind of cleansing.
mhm.
Yeah. So, word prompts. Let's have a little fun, shall we?
Okay.
Let's go down memory lane. Um, Social business.
Oh, wow, yes. Was that one of the first projects we worked on?
Yes. Tell us a little bit about what comes to mind when you put the word social business together.
I think we might have worked on a PowerPoint, one of those old PowerPoints that feel, like, very boxy,
Yep.
very limited visuals, and we were trying to bring our clients along on this journey of one, I remember with the US Army ITA ghost tweeting for him and the trust that they put on the IBM team was pretty phenomenal looking back. But bringing these clients along on the journey of what it means to be a social enterprise and to have a human voice and to also use the tools that are accessible right now that people are exploring and wondering and curious about. Let's jump in and let's use them as an organization. Now, the irony of being in the federal government space was there were so many restrictions on social media at that time because you and I were in federal practice together. And I think we were both on a HUD project for maybe a week before you
Yep.
were deployed.
Yep.
And then the US Army, I remember that, and then the VA, we crossed paths there as well.
Yeah.
What was
Absolutely.
your experience remembering social business?
Well, those terms when you put them together, for folks that probably remember that time, and many probably don't because they, the intersection of that. Social media was just emerging at the time, right? Facebook and Twitter and things like that. And this concept that IBM had at the time, which I actually thought we were definitely ahead of the curve here, was this concept of how you take the power of social media and apply it in the trust of a business and a trusted business enterprise. And we were trying to put together the thought leadership of
Mhm.
social business, meaning how do we take the sort of the telemetry of all things social and the tools and change the way that we do business. I think, like many things, we were ahead of our time. We were almost too early to it. And unfortunately, as we saw what happened with social, it kind of went in the social media direction and it led to a lot of distrust. And I think businesses at the time, IBM included, realized this is probably too big of a bronco to lasso,
Mhm.
to rodeo. The second set of words that I wrote down because it made me go down this path was Lotus Connections.
Wow. I am proud to say that I saw the transition at IBM when we finally went to Microsoft.
Mhm. Talk a
Yeah,
little bit about
IBM.
this because people don't know the history of. I mean, obviously, Lotus was a software company,
Yeah.
based in Massachusetts. IBM bought them many, many years ago. We acquired a lot of amazing talent, including many of my mentors. And then, when we were at IBM, believe it or not, folks, we were not allowed to use any Microsoft products. So, Lisa, let's talk about that.
For a long time, we were using Lotus Notes. We were emailing on this archaic tool, but telling the world that we were a top tier technology company. And there was something that just felt so strange about that. And I would tell my friends, yep, we use Lotus Notes. Here we are in 2018. But we also, in my time at IBM, we made the transition to using MacBooks, and that was also really awesome of us to finally make that transition. We weren't just using ThinkPads. And Bill, one thing I remember about you on a VA project, you said, "I'm not gonna use email. I'm gonna do everything using Connections," which was the platform that we had. And again, you were very much a pioneer in this, and I loved watching your experiment, and you weren't afraid to experiment, and that's why I loved being on teams with you because that is something that I will always admire is just trying something, and if we fail, we fail, but let's see how it goes.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I have so many good memories from that time. Thank you for reminding me of that experiment that I did, where I literally said, I'm not doing email. If you want to reach me, you'll reach me on Lotus Connections, which essentially was the social business platform, right?
Mhm.
And people could do things like wikis and blogs and respond and comment. Pretty much all the stuff we now know, we take for granted. But at the time, it was pretty revolutionary to say that. And even
Okay.
now, what's fascinating, Lisa, as you remind me of that, I'm not too different today. In fact, I tell a lot of my teams, um, if you want to reach me, it's not necessarily going to be an email. The fact that I did that experiment at the time, which said, I'm not going to do email. And if you need to reach me in these social business platforms. It was pretty bold and daring. And what's interesting, here we are so many years later, and I'm not that different. I mean, I tell people on my team and I tell leaders, if I'm spending all this time in email, I'm actually not doing my job. Like, I
Mm,
should be spending time with teams and with people, having complex discussions. And those don't happen in email. Sometimes they happen in chats, sometimes they happen in meetings. Back in the day when you and I overlapped, and we worked at a pretty amazing organization, the U.S. Army IT agency, or
mm.
Information Technology Agency. I remember at the time, my niece came to spend the day with us,
Yeah.
like kind of like bring a family member to work day, and she spent the day with us. And I told her, I said, "You can sit at my desk," and she said, "Well, where will you sit?" And I said, "Well, I don't sit." She's like, "What do you mean you don't sit?" I said, "Oh, I never sit. Like I'm always on the move." It's like, "Well, what do you mean? There's like a computer here, and like, how do you do your job if you're not at your desk?" And I off I went to the many meetings we used to do at ITA. And I remember that night she was home with us and she called her dad. She said, "Dad, you'll never believe it. I sat at Bill's desk and he never sat down. Like he was never at his desk. And he was like in meetings and with people and walking everywhere. Like, how do you get work done?" And he's like, "Yeah." welcome to actually being a leader. Right? And I know you know what I'm talking about,
Mhm.
right? In the Pentagon and over in Alexandria and all these places. Like,
Mhm.
I think back to when I left IBM and I went to the University of Washington,
Mhm.
and I remember them pulling up the dashboard of metrics that a PMO had, right? And they
Hmm.
said, we want to know how many people have attended meetings or, you know, um, how many people have rated the feedback or whatever. And then they came to me and they said, well, where are your metrics as a change lead? And on the fly, I said, oh, let me share my screen. And this is again pre-pandemic, so I had to like put it up on a presentation at the front of the room. A lot harder than it seemed, but and I switched to my Fitbit dashboard,
Hmm.
and they said, "What are we looking at?" And this is with the CIO and the CTO and all these people at University of Washington. And I said, "You're looking at my Fitbit dashboard." And they said, "Why do you have your Fitbit dashboard up? Like, why are we looking at the number of steps you've taken?" And I said, "Because this is representative of all the departments that I went and met with on campus. Like, I go to meet with the dean, I go to meet with the administrator, I go to meet with the provost." And it was, you know, thousands and thousands of
Mhm.
steps. And my point in sharing that with them, and I think they finally got it, was this is how change happens.
Mhm.
Like, you meet people where they're at. You go to them. You don't limit them to an inbox and a reply that is asynchronous. Change happens when we get close.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that's the things I really loved about the work that we did at those agencies. It couldn't have been done
Mhm.
unless we got close.
Mhm.
Was that your memory too?
Yes, you immediately took me back to the number of steps at the Pentagon, and that project was such a cool opportunity to learn the heart and soul of some of that government work, and the trust that that client had in IBMers was phenomenal. And some of my dear friends are still from that project. So not only the relationships with the client, but with each other as IBMers, we developed really strong bonds when we were in that hard work together. 7 a.m., getting ready for the auditorium presentation, and we would have to be there walking our client through the Pentagon auditorium of how the flow was going to be, where people were going to sit for the event, and we'd had to know the ins and outs of that event because they trusted us to share that communication with the workforce, which is a huge opportunity and honor to be able to have done that work.
Yeah, I remember it being very rewarding work because, you and our colleagues, like, we didn't sign up to do like production level event management, like for the world's largest office building.
Yes.
And yet, here we were, right? We were having to do that. We were stages and remember VTCs. Oh god,
Mhm.
setting up the video teleconferences and
Mhm.
the ISDN numbers
Mhm.
and connecting to different divisions around the world. I mean, we were doing some epic level
Mhm.
stuff,
Mhm.
and very young, right? And trusted
Mhm.
to do it. The strategic communications work we were doing, the social business work we were doing,
Mhm.
it was really cutting edge at the time. And that's why, like, I look back on it and I can be super proud
Mhm.
of the people, right? Some of those people I've had on this podcast, Kristen and Matt and
I
others that
listened to
were
that one, it was
ITA
great.
alumni. Um, and it was those experiences that made us,
Mm.
right? Made us the consultants we were.
Mhm.
But also it was those experiences of the people that trusted us in our 20s to
Mhm.
do this.
Mhm.
Um, and that all goes back to values. It all goes back to how we were raised. It all goes back to believing in ourselves and working through the ambiguity and
Mhm.
saying, "Well, I've never done this before, but you know what? I I know I'm a pretty good quality person who's got high expectations,
Mhm.
and I'm gonna do my best to make sure that I meet those or exceed those, and leave, probably most importantly, leave a memorable um, touch point for people,
Mm.
right, in the audiences."
Mm.
Corporate Service Corps.
Mm.
You were an alum, yes?
So interesting story about Corporate Service Corps. I applied for 5 separate sessions for that. It was my goal when I was at IBM. I wrote a whole paper in my business class about IBM's commitment to corporate service corps, and I really, really, really wanted to do it. And I never got an opportunity to do it. And I talked to one of my mentors, Barbara Lombardo, about that because I got accepted right before the pandemic. So the program had to evolve and unfortunately didn't have an opportunity. And she said, "Why don't you create one? You're not limited to just doing IBM's corporate service corps. You love to travel, you love to make an impact. What are you going to do?" And that for me, that mindset of, yeah, why have I been limiting myself to this one program? So having those conversations with people to be able to say, these are ideas and they don't always turn out the way you think they're going to. And I remember talking to you about your experience and how formative it was. You were one of the first corporate service core programs, and the alumni experience of that is just so positive. So, if you want to share anything about your experience too.
I mean, yeah, it was, again, life-changing, career-changing. I had the opportunity. It was very early on. I think it was maybe the second year of the program, but the first cohort to go to Egypt. And it was life-changing and career-changing, and relationships you made then are still held now. And when you get an organization that says, "Hey, we are going to invest in you. We are going to send you to a part of the world for a couple months pro bono.
Mhm,
We're going to cover all your expenses. We're going to cover all your work. We're going to make sure you have a place to come back to so that while you're there in that part of the world, you can focus on impact and you can focus on leaving the world better than you found it." That was literally like the unwritten mission in my soul.
mhm,
And I was so lucky to get to go. And even to this day, like I stay in touch with people. I'm now chatting with people's siblings, so people I went on that experience with, I'm connecting to their siblings who are reaching out to talk about change that's happening in the world now, right? A lot of them are in industries that are being highly impacted
mm,
and affected by the world and the government and everything else, we know all too well. And and it's just amazing. Like if you had said to me in 2009 when I went that I'd still be in touch, that I'd still see the world shaped accordingly to the time I spent in both Cairo and Luxor, um, and those connections and that give back, I probably would have not believed you, but here we are, and it remains a touchstone for me. And what kind of breaks my heart now is we're in this world where honestly we probably need more instances of
mhm,
corporate service corps, but we're not seeing that,
mm,
and people are cutting back budgets and they're cutting back opportunities for people to go through different experiences and diversity and inclusion. And it's quite heartbreaking, but it's also why people like you and I have to hold on to those truths and keep them going, right? I mean, it's kind of, you know, travel is is one of the number one ways
mhm,
to not only remember who you are, but also remember like the beauty and joy of the world, and not anchor in scarcity. And I think there are sadly a lot of people out there who would prefer us to
mhm,
stay in the corner of scarcity, and I just refuse to do that.
mhm.
Yeah.
Well
Okay,
said.
next word. Pentagon data center. What comes to mind?
Fun times. As a consultant at the Pentagon, we got to see some pretty phenomenal things. And the tours that we got to lead and also be a part of were incredible. And I will never forget those experiences. I brought my parents into the Pentagon because one of the abilities as a badge holder is you can show people this phenomenal hub and heart of our government. And I had so much pride in that to be able to say, "This is where I work, and these are the clients that I'm supporting, and look at the access we have to this technology. And, oh, by the way, put your phone in that locker and lock it because we're not gonna see it for the rest of the time here." And and we're gonna take this all in without the technology at our hip.
Yeah, I kinda miss those days, honestly. I never thought
Mhm.
I'd say this, but it makes a lot of sense. I miss the days where we had to lock up our phones
Yeah.
and didn't have them on our hip all the time, every day. I also miss the days where we would take out our hard drive, at the end of the day and lock it in a safe. And we would go home and we didn't bring work home. We couldn't bring work home. It was all classified work. So that division, to your point around home is home and work is work, we worked really hard, no question, but it was really nice to, I mean, on occasion, we were there till like 8 or 10 p.m. I remember a number of times when we, on our contract, only were allowed to stay till 10 p.m. If we were past 10 p.m., and you had to badge out. People don't realize this. You have
Mhm.
to badge out and in everywhere you go. And I was badging out at like 10:15, 10:30. This is when the Zambonis go around the Pentagon and clean all
Mhm.
the floors. People
Mhm.
don't realize they use
Mhm.
full-on Zambonis to clean
Mhm.
the floors of the Pentagon, and you're, like, dodging Zambonis to they don't run you over. And it was, like, 10:30, and I beeped out, and I, like, set off an alarm, and the guy came over, and he's like, "I gotta run your badge," and he ran the badge and said, "You're not on a contract that allows you to be here past
Mhm.
10 p.m. Like, you're" I was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry," but there
Mhm.
was that much work to be done. But,
Mhm.
yeah, the access we had to see that level and see what happens at the heart, like literally the four ventricles of the government, um, is like an experience like no other. It also allows us as taxpayers to
Mhm.
understand like the importance of certain things, and it is heartbreaking to see all of these programs cut.
I see.
I mean, I get it. There's fraud, waste, and abuse happens everywhere, and we
Mhm.
people can be more efficient. But you and I know, like seeing these huge cuts that are happening
Mhm.
HUD,
I
VA,
see.
HHS, DOD, like veteran, it's heartbreaking. And
Mhm.
we're all doing our best to help those that are affected. But
Mhm.
we did have an amazing, amazing time to
Mhm.
get to work there. I also took my godparents, many of my siblings, my parents, and yeah, like I love that we had those memories.
And it gave me such perspective too of the IBMer because I transitioned into a role that was not in consulting, it was in HR. And I was writing communications that would go to all IBMers. And I had to say, let's remember that not all IBMers are using their IBM laptop in an office. There
Yes,
are some IBMers that are using client laptops and on client site. And it gives you a perspective of what the work of IBMers was.
right.
Never would have had that perspective without it.
We had such breadth and depth,
Mm.
truly. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, next word, Dublin.
Dublin, my study abroad experience. I did my full junior year abroad, and I know you spent a lot of time there as well. And you even wrote a poem about St. Stephen's Green,
I
and that brought
did,
me right
yes.
back to that beautiful place. So
Yeah.
much about Maine is very similar to Dublin as well. The water and the greenery and the climate that is not always kind, but it gives you this strength to carry on and persist, and the pub culture, my gosh, I
Yes.
loved it. The live music, ugh, it was amazing, and I got to study at Trinity College, which was right in the heart of
Yeah.
the city. I studied business at Trinity, and it was established in the 1500s. It's an
Yeah.
incredible institution to be a part
Yeah.
of.
I still flirt with the idea and fantasy of going for another degree
Yeah.
and going to Trinity for it. So,
Yeah.
like, or teaching. I mean, imagine how great it would be to go to Trinity and teach, right? In
Mhm.
Dublin would be amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, next word, bridges.
Bridges. Yes, I am crossing a bridge right now from the world of IBM and that corporate identity to my next identity. And it has been a wonderful journey. And it's been filled with a lot of time with family and friends and in community. And I started drawing physically a picture of a bridge. Back in the pandemic, I was working with a career coach, Julie Abel, Dave Abel's wife, was helping me
Oh,
with this.
wow, really? I
Yes,
did not know that. That's amazing.
yes, and she said, "Get out a piece of paper and let's draw this bridge. Here you are at IBM. You are gonna walk across this bridge and you will one day be an IBM alum, and what do you want to do along that bridge, and how are you gonna get there?" And so that's something I'd been working on for years, and it's been really fun to make that cross.
That's great. I love that. I love that, that's persistently been with you that whole time.
Mhm.
I do think anytime somebody crosses a bridge, it's like a little bit of a spiritual moment, and I hope people don't, mistake that. Okay, last word, skills.
Skills.
Yeah.
So lucky are we that we have developed so many at our time together at IBM, but then also in life. And
Mm,
it's those life skills that almost those life experiences that teach you so much, whether for me it's parenting and that journey of raising two young boys and the skills that are required for that, which are very translatable to what I'm going to be doing in my next role. And those skills are something that you never lose.
yeah,
They stay with you forever, and I'm now at a point in my career where I love sharing them, and
yeah,
I love being able to help other people learn what their skills are and how to best use those innate skills to do what you wanna do in the world.
yeah. Well, consider this one of those sharings, right? Because the telling of your story, the telling of your, your growth, your transition, your skills. I mean, just think about it. It lands in the ears and the hearts of people that you may not meet that are all over the world. And I agree with you. Like that's sort of what motivates me. Always has been. Is that it's one thing to acquire skill. It's a whole nother thing to share it and see it come to life in other people and brought to life. So thank you so much for this opportunity, and the nudges and the bridges, and thanks for trusting me, right? For one, to walk alongside. And, when people are at that point of potential transition and they go through their phone book and they say, "Who do I want to call?"
Mm,
It means so much to me that like I was on that list and that we could literally pay it forward in so
mm.
many different ways. So thank you so much, Lisa. I really appreciate it.
Bill, this has been a wonderful opportunity, and with a heart filled with gratitude, thank you for the platform, for the opportunity to share, to reconnect with you, and it has just been an honor to chat, reconnect.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And just, last little fair warning for people that are listening. I tend to have, and I've had this happen before, where people will either join the show, share their story in this very vulnerable, hey, I went through a transition or I'm making a change or I decided to leave a company or a job on my own, fruition. And people sometimes listen to these stories. They're so touched, so inspired. They too take that action, right, for themselves. And so for whoever's listening and wants to take that action, we're here for you, right? And know that you don't have to go through it alone. I've also gotten people who've reached out to me afterwards and said, I am never allowing somebody on your show because they're going to leave the job afterwards. And I laugh at that, but I understand what people are talking about. But still, I believe we all have a divine purpose, and if people can find it, get close to it, walk alongside it, or see it reflected in a way,
Mhm.
I think that's winning for everyone. So thank you for sharing so vulnerably, honestly. I can't wait to come visit Maine.
Yes. Looking forward to hosting you.
Thank
Thanks,
you. I
Bill.
appreciate it. Maybe we'll do a part two in person.
Oh, love it. After a cold
Awesome.
plunge.
After a cold punch. Exactly. Thanks so much, Lisa.
Bye.